Amazing. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm really excited for our conversation today. We are joined by the incredible Jessica Reinhardt, who I will introduce in just a moment. But first, to introduce you all to what we're doing today. My name is Leah Weiss. I am the co-founder of Preql. Preql is an analytics and data platform for finance teams. We help with consolidation, reconciliation, and automating all of your manual processes. But much better to have a Preql customer and partner speak about some of that, and that is part of what we'll do. But we also want today to be really informative, both in terms of building your data strategy from within a finance organization, potentially also career advice, how to get yourself out of common pitfalls of finance teams and get a little bit more creative with data. And we are lucky enough to have Jessica join us. She's had a really incredible career path from the data and finance perspective. And she's done incredible work at MLB Network to help modernize their data platforms, think ahead in terms of data strategy, and is really doing some of the most innovative stuff in the business. So thank you so much for joining us, Jessica.
Thanks for having me.
And do you mind just sharing a little bit about your background and what led you to your current role at MLB Network?
Yeah, sure. So I have a computer science degree. I went to Siena College up in Albany. Um, so yeah, I've computer science for 4 years and then kind of switched gears a little bit and got my master's in sports administration, which now everyone's like, oh, you're in the perfect spot. But at the time, I didn't know where I was going to go. So I started my professional career at MasterCard. I was there from 2015 to 2021 and then moved to a federal credit union back home. At MasterCard, I was in the data warehouse, so really got my feet wet with SQL, and that's kind of been my bread and butter ever since then. And then at the credit union was a really unique opportunity where 2 weeks after I started, they announced they were merging with another credit union. So I really got to learn how to merge data that practically the same data, but in completely different structures. And then found myself at the network. I've been there, it was a year in December, so almost a year and a half. And yeah, it's been great. You kind of touched on, and I think a lot of the reason we're having this talk is I'm the first business intelligence dedicated hire at the network. So I'm embedded into the finance team, but I'm really focused on the technology part of it, which is why Prequel is like the perfect company to work with.
Amazing. Yeah. And I think we are both a little bit unique in the sense that we've worked closely with finance teams, but also within data teams
Yep.
and IT teams. Can you share more about kind of how you understood finance problems back when you were purely wearing a data hat, and then what you've learned from being kind of an embedded data person on a finance team?
Yeah, I mean, the finance of it all has always been a mystery to me, I feel like. I had a business minor, and that's about all my finance acumen came from. But it was interesting because I think in a lot of companies, right, like finance can kind of be the end all be all, right? It's, are we making money? Are we losing money? Could it be, are we making our customers money, or whatever it may be? I think the interesting part for me on the finance side of things is, at Mastercard, at the credit union, it was other people's money we were dealing with, right? So like, I had to be correct down to the cent. Now moving to a finance team, where, not saying we have to be correct, like we can't be wrong, but it's a lot more budgets and forecasts and things like that. And I've really had to learn a lot of that business side within this role, which has been really, really interesting. And I think because I am on the finance team, it's a lot easier for me to pick up on those concepts, especially coming to the network where the business is completely different. We're a production company. I've never been part of anything with media or anything like that. So, um, the production side of things are really interesting too. That really feeds into the finance, because that's, it costs a lot of money to produce our shows.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's been really interesting.
Yeah, I think everyone always says that the best data people, and I think maybe just the best employees in general, are the people who like deeply understand the business and the business model and how things function. I've always thought that from the perspective of a data person. And I think that's the only reason I was a pretty decent data person. Um, but I think it's even more important in the finance context because to do budgeting, planning, and forecasting, you're really creating a data representation of the entire business and how it functions. If you don't know that intuitively, there's no way that you can kind of model it out in data. This is maybe also a good opportunity to sort of make my confession as a data person who now works exclusively with finance teams. My whole life, when I was building infrastructure and technology and BI and dashboarding, all of these things, I was sort of told to ignore finance. Like they got it, they do
They
their own
know what they're
thing.
doing.
I don't know where they pull the data from, but they seem to, they're not complaining too loudly. And now that I work day in and day out with finance professionals, I realize one, I'm not sure what I was doing because like that was the core, that is the core of the business, modeling out your business and measuring all of the inputs that drive performance. That is the data team as far as I'm concerned. But I was also kind of surprised to find that these finance professionals who have so much responsibility and require so much depth of knowledge, both on the business side and in sort of um, the technical side to some degree, or the analytical side maybe, um, don't really have access to technology resources, things that would make this process a lot easier. So this might be a hard question to ask you because I'm sort of asking why MLB Network knew they needed you before you arrived there. But how do you think they arrived at this conclusion that the missing piece in an FP&A kind of org specifically was someone with your data background?
Yeah, I think for the network, it was um, really wanting to find a way to automate things, to kind of bring the technology they already had to the 21st century. I mean, it's not crazy old or anything. That conference we went to with the finance people talking about the
Green
green
screen,
screens or
yeah.
nothing like
We
that.
work with people with green screens. No shame about
No
green
shame,
screens.
no
Yeah.
shame. But I think just wanting to look towards the future and see really to make things easier for them. I think about all the one-off reporting that they need to do, and then it's interesting when so if your finance team aren't the ones in charge of the data, right? It's probably your IT team who is also dealing with the data for every other team within your company, and they were like us and didn't know are like us and like didn't know don't know finance things, which no fault to them. I don't know it until I'm in it either, so it's hard to develop things or know what's out there when finance isn't the only thing you're concerned with.
Right.
um
Yeah.
so when we take that burden off of them, I think that was a big thing too. Like as soon as IT heard that they had someone coming in, and also, oh, and now we're working with Preql, like, oh, we don't have to, like, if you're telling us we don't have to do anything, that's completely fine. Take something off our plate. I think if you present it in the right way, all the other parties involved will absolutely jump at the chance.
Yeah. Yeah, I've gotten to know your IT team a little bit, and they're amazing at what they do. I can vouch for the fact that as long as you can convincingly explain that we will make their lives easier, not
Yes.
harder, there's like
We
no
will
stopping
maintain
it.
it.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about
Yeah.
it. Just give us the data, please.
Which is maybe a good segue into I don't know if it's controversial, but maybe for our audience, there's always this question of like, who should own the data?
Mm-hmm.
Where should data sit? And I think by default, it ends up happening a lot in IT because that they control the systems that are sort of the source data of finance, but of any other function as well. Um, that said, there are some disadvantages to having a team that is mainly focused on infrastructure, also kind of owning the outputs of all of that data.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking a leading question because I'm biased, but from your perspective, having been on both sides of that, where do you think data should sit in an org?
Yeah, I mean, for me, with us, with the finance team, us owning the data has been just so good for our team because we talk a lot about like that single source of truth.
Yeah.
And for us, we have so many sources of data. So as the production company, and we're not just doing work for MLB Network, we're doing work for the league, we're doing work for the NHL network. And we have so many systems that are keeping track of all the equipment we're using, all the people that are in front of the camera, all the people that are in back of the camera. um, we want to make sure that when people work they're getting paid, and if people are getting paid, that's because they work. So I know you mentioned, reconciliation. Like, that was the first thing we started working on because that is such a huge part of our day-to-day lives. um, and for us to own that and know where the data is coming from, and also I think a big part, and you kind of touched that on this, it's knowing how the data is being used
Hmm.
so that people aren't like, well, where did this come from, how are you getting this? We know that end-to-end cycle, we know where it's coming from, how we're using it, and the definitions behind whatever we're presenting.
Yep. Yep. And I think you obviously your role within the FP&A team is unique, but you're also a unique business in some ways in terms of the depth of detail that is required in sort of painting a picture of
Hmm.
your business. I think it's down to the 15-minute shift or
We
something like
down to the
that,
shift. We
down to the
know
shift.
who's working on what show on what day. Yeah.
Yes. So to paint a picture of a business down to the shift, it probably requires a lot of data, a lot of different inputs. Maybe talk about how you were able to craft a business strategy
Hmm.
around um, using this data and getting the information you needed out of it, and maybe a little bit of how you've gotten leadership on board with that. This is an organization that is incredible, and you should all go to Secaucus and take a tour if you ever have the opportunity. I played wiffle ball; it was the best. But a lot of people have spent their entire careers at a place like this, and things that are done a certain way have been done that way for decades. So, for anyone out there who's thinking about how do I make a cultural change in my org, how do I convince someone that there's a better way to do things when they've never seen it before and it's hard to imagine, what would you tell them?
For me, I'm a very visual person. So it kind of came down to I created a document that showed all our different data sources and where all that data was going, and the different reports, and the different structures we had to have in the data. Um, and I think once you get someone to wrap their head around that, also showing them how their life can be easier is
Yeah.
definitely is a big help. I'm a big proponent of self-service, so the more that we can figure out ways where our I'm I s- stuck in my old ways and calling them customers, but other folks within the company that are continually asking us for, it might not be the same exact report, but it's basically the same, just maybe for a different show or a different some sort of different filter. If they can just go and get it themselves whenever they want, like, I think that's invaluable.
Yeah.
You can't even like really put a price on that. It helps when you have leadership that do want to look towards the future. You know, and I think it's we talk a lot about opportunity cost.
Hmm.
The minute we stop having to do these one-off reports every hour of the day, we get to build really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And selfishly, I just want to build really cool stuff. Um,
You don't want to do row by row reconciliation for
Not
the rest of
really.
your career?
I live in Excel, and the less I can do that, that would be great. But yeah, I think I'm also, I just think once you can show someone what's possible, that you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even for us, when we're looking at all of our data sources, we didn't know there was even an option to pull from an API from one of our data sources, and now that we do, we're like, well, that's all we want to do. That's what we need. But until you know that what's available, you don't know what you're missing, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking back to how we made the business case with you all. We were kind of your first venture into the world of the cloud. Also, there's a lot of
Yeah.
technology shifts happening. And I think the reason that you came to us in the first place, I think, is in part because you wanted to reallocate some of these like really powerful strategic analytical resources to actually doing analysis and not all of the really kind of in the weeds work that you were working on. Um, but also, finance teams are lean these days and have to be. And as your business model changes, as more networks and partners come online, you need the same amount of people to be able to do more. And when we started talking to you and your counterpart, Ryan, who's amazing, the complexity of the workflows that you had created to do like pretty from the business perspective, like core and not necessarily complex things. But because of how the data was structured, it was kind of a web that needed to be untangled.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of CFOs probably don't even realize that that's what's happening
Right.
because finance people, they have to get it done and they'll find a way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think luckily people realize that maybe there was a threshold that you
Yeah.
were at
Yeah.
where change was needed,
Yep.
and they recognized that it was a data problem and not just like let's not just throw another pure financial
Right.
analyst at the problem. Let's try to solve for the root cause,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is pretty inspiring and um, might be easier than making the case for hiring a new FP&A analyst for every business unit that comes online.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also maybe framing it in a way of it's not it's doing more for finance, right? Like it's something that if you don't already have it, maybe it's also on top of that when you add a tool like Preql or maybe you add a Viz layer or something like that, that it just expands the business case for it by so
Yeah,
much by just hiring like one person if they can already do that.
yeah, yeah. So we talked a little bit about how to make the case for leadership and where you can kind of show value. I think for some of the people tuning in today, they're probably also like analysts in finance orgs or business analysts who are kind of stuck in spreadsheet hell, for lack of a better way to put it, who are spending, 80-90% of their jobs doing these manual workflows. What advice would you give for someone who maybe has a suspicion that there's a better way of doing some things, but is having a hard time even carving out the space to try to figure it out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know for me, like even in my day to day life, I'm just the way my brain is wired. I'm always looking for efficiencies, and like there's just like you're saying, like you have this inkling, like there has got to be another way. Um, and with I would say just like start doing your research. There's so many. I mean, obviously we're gonna plug Prequel here, but there are so many things out there that you can start reading about, listening to that for me, I had to start kind of reframing my mindset a little bit because you do get stuck in these instances where, and we find it a lot at the network where people have been there for so long and
Yeah.
things have been done the same way for so long. It it definitely helps when if you can bring someone else new. Like I have found that since coming on, like I'll just look at Ryan and be like, why do we do it this
Yeah.
way? Because it's hard when once you're ingrained in it, it's hard to take that step back and say, is this the best way to do things? But I would say like don't get lost in the details of it all, which I know especially for us analytical people can be very hard to do. But once you can like take a step back and see the bigger picture, see how things fit together, even maybe you have to blow it out from, 1,000-foot view, but oh, if I can just get these two systems to work together
Hmm.
somewhere, then I don't have to spend so much time reconciling
Yeah.
manually, things like that.
And I do think people sometimes maybe misdiagnose some of these issues. Well, something we see again is, we're not able to get the data out that we need. We should probably migrate ERPs. I know you're coming off of a long migration and not sure that you would recommend it, even though where you landed is great. Or, it's too hard to use this third party SaaS tool because the data isn't integrated, things like that. And you end up doing a lot of this like vendor swap, or like
Mm.
these long-term consulting projects that don't ever get anywhere because you're missing kind of the underlying thing, which is like this is sort of a data integration challenge.
Mhm.
I guess the challenge for us, but within a finance team, is how do you kind of open people's eyes to reframing the problem when they're used to seeing things as like a tooling problem or a resource constraint problem or
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah, I think along those lines too, which we've talked about, is we want to own the data, right? But IT still has to own the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like I could not possibly do what they do. But then that brings along problems of not problems, but just roadblocks of all right, how do we get the data in a usable form that will work for us? And I think that might also be
Yeah.
where a lot of the issues come from, where if we could just not redesign our data, but just get it into a different format or different view or something like that, like
Hmm.
it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah.
And like you said, like for us, I mean, we have some systems where people are literally keying in things by hand, so there can be a typo or there can
Yeah.
in the it's stuff like that where also we've really tried to teach other teams like hey, if you could just do it this way, it would make things a lot easier. For
Yeah.
instance, our reconciliation process before, one side of our business, like they continually had all of these kickouts coming out. And then once we taught them, this is how the process works, this is what we need it to look like when you're inputting the data, the reconciliation process just went so much smoother.
Yeah.
So it could just be opening up how your data looks, and also showing people how their small part fits into the bigger picture. I think allows them to see, oh, if I can just do X, Y, and Z, then our team is able to focus on what reports do you guys need. If the data is in a way that's usable, like we can provide anything you want.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. And I think sometimes people don't realize if they're getting extracts from something, that's not the full scope of the data.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole world, and we can get it to the granularity and the structure that you need. And I think what you said about people who are giving inputs to the data, or in some way their business process affects the data,
Mm-hmm.
they should know how it's being used, because
Yeah.
otherwise you'll never get that feedback loop.
Yeah, absolutely. And just um yeah, knowing how it all fits in together. And also something that we say often is like our reports are only as good as the data, and if it's bad stuff in, it's gonna be
Yeah.
bad stuff out. And I literally I can't like I can't I can only give you what's there.
Yeah.
I can't change that part. So um yeah, trying to show um how that affects like downstream impacts. And also, at like a big company like MasterCard, I just always think about how I felt like reporting was always the last thing
Mm-hmm.
that was thought about. Like they would build a product and they would start using the product, and then someone would come to us and say, "How are we doing?" And
Yeah.
we didn't even know it existed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think also getting, higher ups to think about reporting from the jump makes things a lot
Yes.
easier.
Yes. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit. We've talked a lot about some of the challenges that finance orgs face, and where they can think about opportunities. You have been quite successful in bringing in new technology and kind of redefining um, the innovation of a finance team internally. What can you tell us about kind of maybe the before state, and then what you've been able to achieve with Prequel in this case?
Yeah. So when I came in, basically we were two SQL servers. So it was building reports in SQL, throwing them into Excel, having a lot of reports that were very similar but maybe formatted a few different ways. And we also used a separate tool that was a lot of our like budgeting and forecasting and things like that I had never heard of. When I was applying for the job, I tried looking it up and just couldn't even find anything on it. So as you alluded to, we have started moving to the cloud finally. We're on Snowflake with your guys' help, which I think is another big reason why we went with getting help from Preql is, you were able to kind of step in and say we can help you with that integration part as
Mm-hmm.
well, which was huge. So now we're taking, again, we have so many sources of data, but now it's to the point where we can say, all right, how do we get from A to C, our raw data, B being Snowflake, C being Preql, and now we're to the point where I'm replicating reports, just kind of making sure everything checks out from our old way of doing things to the new way. Um, just the ability to schedule reports, like
Mm-hmm.
haven't had the ability to do that. Uh, our reconciliation process can be a lot smoother now. And I'm also like, I think working with Prequel has been really cool because we're able to say things like, "Oh, it'd be really cool if we could do this or that." And I love when Pandora comes back and says, "We're actually already thinking about it,"
Yeah.
because I'm like, "All right, that means other people have, and I know I'm like on the right track." And just being able to like bounce those data ideas off of each other, because again, being that first kind of business intelligence dedicated hire, I can go to a lot of people about the nitty gritty finance of it all, but the data stuff, it's kind of on Ryan and I, and so to be able to have that kind of back and forth with you all is really
Yeah.
helpful.
Shout out to Pandora. She's
Shout out
always thinking
Pandora.
to, always thinking ahead. She's our product designer. She's wonderful. Um, okay, and from my perspective, I can share a little bit because I have worked closely with Jess and Ryan on implementing Prequel at MLB Network. We started with a relatively simple use case, which was reconciliation, but it's a painful one where you take data from one system, take data from another. In this case, it was kind of like a scheduling system and a payment system. And if those things don't match, you're in trouble. You can't mess with people's money, as we've mentioned. And this was a really painful process, but a great initial use case for Prequel. So what we've done is kind of taken data from both of these systems, consolidated it, created a really nice consolidated kind of curated data layer in a central cloud repository, Snowflake in this case. And then we put Prequel on top of that, where you can manage business logic, things you want to include, exclude, things that are specific to maybe how one department functions, things like that. Um, and then you can build reporting really easily, automate it. So we've taken a process that was quite manual and hopefully made it a lot smoother. And now we're doing that with more reports that you're
Yeah,
responsible
our
for.
P&L reporting. So we're getting in our budget information, our forecasting information, and then bringing in actuals, which is huge for us. Being able to, again, finance, it's how are we doing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so like those are the biggest drivers of that, and being able to kind of on the fly say, oh, we have a new budget, or oh, it's time to reforecast, and being able to utilize Prequel in that way is really really helpful. And yeah, building those like business definitions, like you guys call them, like we have certain things that mean different things depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
So that's really huge for us. We were talking, I was talking with Pandora today about, being able to, um, being able to maybe give certain permissions to either certain reports or certain buckets of reports, things like that. That those are things that like we're really looking forward to, because again, if I can just point someone in the direction of this is our reporting. If you're not finding what you need, I'm more than happy to build it. That's what I'm here for. But we already have so much built.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's about exposing the business to all of the work that you're already doing
Mm-hmm.
because, again, finance has to map out the business and you have to manage all these moving parts. And you certainly don't want every department duplicating those efforts or coming to their own conclusions because you really should own these definitions. Um, Amazing. I think we're coming up on time here. I think your story is inspiring in a few different ways. One, just your career path and the way that you've been able to find your way into a role that's so well suited for you, where you can have such an impact on kind of changing the long term strategy of a very beloved brand and company. Very cool. Um, and also just tactically what you've been able to achieve. So whoever comes on next has big shoes to fill. I guess any last thoughts or advice for people who are um, sitting in an org that they know that could function a bit better and want to kind of model a little bit of what you've been able to achieve?
Yeah, I think like I've said, like just kind of think about the big picture and think about your audience too. Like no matter how much we try not to be like this, like just as humans, we're like, all right, what does this mean for me? Or how, like, why does this matter to me? And being able to kind of think about your audience, think about what would be most impactful for them. I think will get you far
I think
in those
that's right.
conversations.
Yeah, tell IT you're going to save them time,
Yeah,
tell your CFO you're going to save them money, and then do
that's
some
about it.
interesting work.
That's it.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for
Thank you for
joining us,
having
Jess. It's
me.
a pleasure to work with you and get the chance to talk. And yeah, we can do follow ups with folks as they are interested, and you're welcome to reach out and ask more questions. And we'd love to help you with your data problems. Thanks, everyone.